recognize Assistant City Manager Bruce Mills to set us up for our first briefing. And that needs to be read. No, punch it again, now talk.
Okay.
I'm kind of screwing with
Trying to
Assistant City
green.
Manager Mills.
Is that better than green? Thank you.
If anybody can't tell, I just, yeah.
Last week you had him spell my name.
Is it green now?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay, you can go now.
Okay, thank you. I'll start over. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Good morning, Council. So today's work session briefing, it's going to be an update on the implementation of the Climate Equity Plan in response to resolution that was passed and the Environmental Investment Plan. So pleased to be here today to represent City Manager Broadnax while he's on vacation, and pleased to provide an update on the Climate Equity Plan, which was adopted by Council in September of 2021. Staff within the Office of Sustainability have been working on this plan and this adoption in partnership with city departments and community stakeholders to advance the city's climate plan. Following the climate equity update, staff will transition to providing a responsive briefing to the Environmental Investment Resolution that was adopted by Council in February. Since February, the Office of Sustainability staff has worked with 17 city departments and community stakeholders, including the Joint Sustainability Committee, to develop a list of potential projects. I'd like to acknowledge Zach Balmer, who's going to be presenting here in a moment, the Chief Sustainability Officer, and his team for their diligent and efficient development and thoughtful process to bring this forward. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Zach to give us his presentation. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you. So morning, Mayor, Council members. I'm Zach Balmer, Chief Sustainability Officer. So as the Assistant City Manager said, I'm here to give an update on implementation of the Climate Equity Plan and the Environmental Investment Plan. So what I'm going to cover is four different pieces today. First, briefly just talk about city investment in climate action that's been going on for decades, and talk about Climate Equity Plan update, just an update on where we are and how we're making progress. Then I'm going to briefly touch on the Inflation Reduction Act and the pursuits that we've been going after as city departments over the last couple of years. And then finally, I'm going to cover the response to the Environmental Investment Plan resolution from February. So first, investment in climate action is not a new thing. Over the past 30 years, the City of Austin and our departments have been implementing climate action and spending hundreds of millions and billions of dollars on climate action. Everything from renewable energy to protecting land to investing in electric vehicles to protecting sidewalks, bicycles, public transportation. The city has been focused on this for many, many years. So I stand here today sort of on the shoulders of many, many people that have been implementing environmental and climate action for decades here. And I just wanted to highlight in the last 2 years, we've actually provided these net zero summaries as part of the proposed budget. So in the proposed budget documents for the last couple of years, we've highlighted investments in each budget that sort of show the ongoing city commitment to this challenge. It's also important to note that that as a city, we have a unique role to play in the response to climate change. We are really on the ground as the climate changes and we experience extreme weather. We at the city here are the ones that feel this first. We feel it in our budget, we feel it in our communities and our people, and in our response. We can also act more quickly and act more swiftly than regional and national governments in response to climate change. So it's important when we're thinking about planning and deciding where we're going to focus our efforts to focus where the city can actually directly control, where we can spend money or take action and actually create a result. But then also be thinking very carefully about where we can incentivize action. Because this is a community-wide global problem, we don't hold all the cards, right? Like people make individual decisions every single day that affect this problem. So we just, as a city, need to be cognizant of investing in the right places to ensure change happens, but also encourage our residents and our businesses in the community to come along with us in this journey. So just a brief overview of the Climate Equity Plan. Some of you weren't here when this Climate Equity Plan was adopted. This actually, the original Climate Protection Plan resolution was 2007. There was a first edition of a community climate plan that was adopted by council in 2015. And then staff worked in 2019, 20, and 21 to create what you see here, the Austin Climate Equity Plan. So this plan contains a goal of net zero community-wide emissions by 2040, which is as bold as any city in the country to reduce our emissions and address climate change. As you can see, the five sections there of the Climate Equity Plan, they focused on the big emission sectors in our community. And then finally, this plan has equity in the title because we weaved equity throughout the process, trying to prioritize programs, incentives to focus on low-income communities and communities of color in our response to climate change. So this plan was adopted September of 2021, and staff across the city organization have been working to implement this plan since then. So in this plan, there are 17 goals and 75 strategies. It's a really large, complicated plan. This is just a slide from our implementation dashboard. It would take me all day to go through the implementation of everything that's in this plan. So if anyone wants to see all the details on every single strategy updates, you can click on the link there. You can see this fully built out dashboard that was built by my staff and city departments to give full transparency on really how are we implementing this plan. Just the takeaway here is that over 75% of the strategies in the plan are under implementation, and we are moving forward. Another really important part of this plan is that there are quantitative targets, right? There are 17 quantitative targets. About a quarter of those targets we are making progress towards and actually on track for. Some were kind of in between and in the middle. And then some of the quantitative goals here were off track, where we are actually not sort of on track to achieve the goal that is stated by 2030. So I think it's important to just be transparent about this and to also, as you'll see as we get to the environmental investment plan discussion, many of the projects and programs that are being proposed as gaps would get us on track for some of these targets that we're not currently meeting. So we can talk about the actions, we can talk about the things that we're doing, but the numbers and really what the carbon footprint of our community is, that's really where the rubber hits the road, and that's really like what the reality is of the results of our actions to address climate change. So there are basically 6 areas when you look community-wide at our carbon footprint. 2 are combined together, electricity and natural gas. So that's essentially the energy that's used in buildings. And as you can see over the last 12 years, energy that's been used in buildings, the carbon emissions associated with that has dropped precipitously, primarily due to Austin Energy's activities with renewable energy, energy efficiency, and so forth. The next major category is transportation. So transportation emissions is the fossil fuels that are used in all the cars, trucks, vehicles, everything that's out there driving around every day. As you can see, those emissions dropped dramatically during COVID. They're sort of on their way back up, but aren't anywhere near as high as they were before COVID happened. And then we have 3 smaller emission sources. We track these because they're real and they're happening in the community, but we have less effect over these 3 sectors. So industrial emissions is primarily emissions that come from semiconductor facilities in our area that we don't have regulatory power over. Refrigerants are these small chemicals that are in all the air conditionings, all the refrigerant, everything that uses a compressor and creates cooling. Those chemicals leak into the environment, so we're looking at ways of how can we stop that leakage and slow that down. And then finally, waste. There's some small emissions associated with waste. That's emissions from landfills. So there are some open landfills in Travis County. They all capture and destroy their methane, but they're still emissions. So when you stack those bars on top of each other, this shows our total community-wide carbon footprint and the progress that we've been making over the past 12 years. So we first started tracking this whole community carbon footprint back in 2010. Emissions for our entire community peaked in 2011 and have been going down ever since. So emissions have gone down in total 25% over the last 12 years. But as you can see, going to net zero, there's a long way to go, right? The goal line there is the goal line that was adopted by City Council, and that's essentially by 2030 it would be a 75% reduction from our 2020 where the goal line starts there. So while we have been really successful, and I think we're one of the leading cities in the country in terms of really bringing emissions down, there is still a long way to go. We still have a lot of work to do. Another important thing to talk about is it's impressive to see emissions coming down, but as we all know, our city's been growing. So since 2011, our population in our boundary area for calculating emissions has gone up by 25%. Emissions have gone down by 25% in that same time. So our per capita emissions are actually down 40% over the past decade. So that's a really important story to tell, and I think really shows success in the city's commitment, our community's commitment to addressing climate change. So a last thing just to sort of think about in terms of going forward and our city and community-wide approach to addressing climate as we move into the future. Many of the low-cost climate actions have already been implemented. So much of the simple things the city has already done. These are the things that are cheap, the things that have really easy paybacks. They've already been done. But as you all can see in the world around us, new technology is evolving very quickly. 10 years, electric vehicles barely existed. 10 years ago, much renewable energy was very expensive. It's evolving quickly. Costs are coming down for things. So keeping our eye on how that technology is changing and how we invest in the right things is important. The next thing is that community action is really needed to scale. One of the hardest sectors to reduce emissions in Austin, where we have the least direct control, is transportation. Because transportation, while we can provide, we're working towards providing a much better public transportation system, individuals make their own choices about how they get to work, how they get to the store, how they get around every day. And much of those choices are still fossil fuel-based choices in cars. So we really need to work community-wide together to scale those solutions. And then finally, we spent a lot of time, as we sort of transition to talk about the environmental investment plan, we spent a lot of time thinking about the range of solutions from energy to transportation to waste to protecting natural systems. And all the actions are needed to get to net zero, right? We can't just focus on one thing. There's not a silver bullet to the solution. We need to work towards moving all of these different solutions forward in the coming decades. Okay. So transitioning to just briefly talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. So Inflation Reduction Act was passed by Congress and signed by the President in the fall of 2022. This is essentially the largest commitment and the largest amount of spending and support that's ever been implemented for climate action in the United States. So there's over $369 billion in federal funding that was passed in this bill. So it's not just one program. It's not just one tax credit. As you can see from the graph here, there are myriad of programs implemented against numerous different federal agencies, and there's a lot of different nooks and crannies where this money exists. So because, again, this affects all sorts of different parts of the city organization, the Office of Sustainability has been coordinating our citywide response to pursue this funding. We track and coordinate response to all of the different grant opportunities. We've hired a consultant to help. We've done workshops with city staff to make sure that we're prepared. And we've partnered with community-based organizations. There are numerous programs in this throughout these opportunities where it requires community connection with city action. So this is just the very high-level summary of everything that has been pursued over the course of the last year and a half. So over $140 million has been awarded across those 5 projects there. We are waiting to hear on over $323 million in grant submissions that we're waiting on responses right now. And because of the timing of this year, we expect to hear on all of these before the fall. So there's potentially a lot of big wins and a lot of big funding in for projects that would support reducing emissions and support climate action. We are in process of working on $160 million in grant applications right now. These will be submitted over the course of the next couple months. And then finally, there are a couple that we didn't win. You can't win all of them, so $50 million that we weren't awarded. So this has been a sort of illuminating process to pursue all of these, and exciting because it really brings funding where funding's needed. Okay, so last part of this presentation. So in February, you all passed Resolution 2024-0215-025, which reaffirmed the city's commitment to net zero emissions by 2040. It asked city staff to prepare capital improvements or programs that would, in 4 different categories: reduce carbon emissions, decrease water usage and improve water quality and detention, advance sustainability of city operations, and improve community resilience. And then it asked for the projects and programs that are recommended, think about how would they be funded. Could they be funded through utility rates and fees, general fund expenditures, grants, or general obligation bonds? So the resolution also asked for us to go look through about 15 different plans that had been adopted by departments, determine where there were gaps, determine where we weren't moving as quickly as we thought, and essentially come forward with project proposals that would move the needle and would really help us make progress in these areas. It should also be noted that it was called out that the Joint Sustainability Committee, which is a city commission that oversees the implementation of climate action in Austin, it recommended that they do a public hearing and do their own set of recommendations based on public input. So we went through a whole process and submitted to council a memo essentially summarizing the staff response to this, and included the Joint Sustainability Committee recommendations last week. So I'm just going to briefly walk through that. So the response to this resolution, the Office of Sustainability essentially started cataloging what were all the plans, what were all the gaps. We got, as it was said earlier, 17 different departments together. We worked together to essentially aggregate project proposals, distill those proposals, prioritize those proposals, focus those, and went from a very, very wide, long list of potential projects to a much narrower, shorter, more focused list of projects and programs and investments that would move the needle here. The Joint Sustainability Committee went on their journey of public input, crafting their own responses, and their recommendation was approved on April 30th. So essentially all of this has come together in summary. So the next 4 slides are just the high-level summary of the 4 categories of potential projects, and listed from largest to smallest, sort of what those project proposals are. I'm not going to walk through every single one because it's in the memos. You can also see we added this little JSC tag to the side, the little green button there. Those highlight proposals where there was agreement between Joint Sustainability and Community, as well as the staff recommendation. So what's in the table is the staff recommendation. So as we walk through these, if there are questions at the end, we have staff members from all the departments here that can answer questions on any of these proposals if you have them. So some of the really big ones that were proposed here were 2 different facilities for Austin Resource Recovery, more weatherization and EV charging programs for low and moderate customers from Austin Energy, and more transportation demand management and safety programming through TPW. So those are some of the big highlighted ones, but as you can see, there's much more. On water quality, quantity, and land summary, it should also be noted that there is overlap in these categories, right? When you protect land, you protect water resources, but you can also sequester carbon. So there's not any one exact category, perfect category for these, but there's overlap in all these because there's many actions and programs that the city would implement that would reduce emissions, increase resilience, increase water capacity all together. The biggest item here at the top is the land acquisition item. So upwards of $1 billion to protect upwards of or more of 20,000 acres of land in the Austin area. That's a big one. That could happen across multiple different departments. And protecting land, the sooner we do it, the better the investment is going to be longer term for us. As you can see, there's a couple other big items here. Protecting trees, Civilian Conservation Corps, citywide green infrastructure plan. These are all things that would increase the natural systems in our community and protect climate change. The next category was community resilience. So these are strategies that primarily would increase our resilience and ability to adapt in the face of climate change as it will affect us. So I'll just talk about the first two. First one is to enhance city-owned facilities that are community-facing with backup power, with backup water, with all the resources to make sure that they are operational when in times of need. And then the next one is the idea of a new program to essentially provide grant dollars and incentives and funding for residential and commercial facilities in the community to help them be more fire resilient, reduce water usage, have battery storage, more energy efficiency, all those things. So help the community become more resilient in their own facilities. The last category was city operations. So as you can imagine in city operations, the big things are our facilities and our vehicle fleet. So the first one here is a unified city facilities operation and maintenance and improvement plan to help improve all city facilities and make them more efficient. And then the last one there is to advance the decarbonization of the city fleet, as well as build out electric vehicle infrastructure. Electric vehicles do save the city money long term, but there is some extra cost up front to facilitate that transition. As we went through this process, there were also some other projects that were identified with transportation and public works and watershed protection. All the projects, these are fully listed out in the memo. All of these projects are in these departments' long-term capital plans. They do have plans to eventually raise the funding and eventually try to access all the funding to fully implement these plans. So it was unclear if these were unfunded or sort of to be funded in the future, but we included them in the list anyway so you could see them. So just two last slides here. So across all of our conversations with finance and capital delivery and all the departments in this process, there were a lot of questions about the funding mechanisms, and I'm not the expert on that. We have experts that can answer more questions on this here today. Generally, general obligation bonds, as we define these things and tag them in our response to council, general obligation bonds can generally be used for land acquisition, projects for east-west agricultural lands. They could be used for resource recovery, watershed, transportation, public works projects, but those would actually be paid back by their fees and not taxes. And then finally, general obligation bonds shouldn't be used for water or power utility projects because they have their own revenue bonding authority that they raise funds when they need them. And then finally, all capital projects, things that are buildings, infrastructure, built environment that actually need designs and engineering done, it's recommended that all of those projects be part of the city project process for a future bond development program and not be rushed to essentially go through the full process the Capital Delivery Service is promoting. Okay, so final next steps. Staff is going to continue to work on calculating more specific costs, getting more specific scopes of work, quantifying exact environmental benefits, and analyzing financing options. So it was a heavy lift for staff to create this big list of projects and proposals, and more refinings needed to make sure that these projects get more specific and more accurate. We're going to continue working with financial services and law to further vet possible funding sources in compliance with the city's policies and legal requirements. So as some of these projects and proposals are pushed forward, we're going to have to really buckle down with them to make sure that the right funding mechanism is brought forward and in time as we pursue these. The next thing that came up as part of this process, this is really a takeaway for me, is that in other leading cities across the country, Minneapolis, Portland, Denver, those cities have figured out ways to create ongoing sort of sustained funding mechanisms to fund climate action. So we just call it a climate fee here. I'm not sure what this would look like. We would, again, need to work with staff to figure out how could this be created. But it was just clear that going through this exercise to develop all these needs was an important exercise. But if we had actual dedicated funding and could go through a process every year to know that there was funding, work with outside stakeholders, and actually spend down that funding like in an annual cycle, it would be just a much more sustainable approach to this instead of passing big targets, identifying gaps, and then trying to fill those gaps over time. And then finally, continued collaboration between staff, commissions, and local experts really is key on this. I think as we saw, the Joint Sustainability Committee put forward some fantastic recommendations. And the more that we can sort of align these recommendations and project analysis, the better that we'll all be going forward to solve this huge problem. So that's it. Any questions?
Thank you, sir. I'm sure we're going to have some questions, but if Council, if you don't mind, I want to start and ask a couple because I want to make sure I understood a couple of things. One is you're not making recommendations in this report, and you're not prepared to make recommendations on the timing and size of any GEO bond program right now. Is that right?
Yes, we are not.
Okay.
This was essentially just a list of projects and potentially how they could be funded.
Yeah, I just kind of want to get that out there so that as we continue this discussion about something this important and continue to want public input and public support for it, I want to make sure that people understand where we are in the process.
Yep.
As you go forward on that, one of the things that I hope you will categorize as you try to do this is help from the professional staff perspective, everybody that's involved in this, and it looks to me like everybody's involved in this, but I appreciate that. But as you bring that forward, one of the things that I think that we as a council are going to need to be prepared to talk about and be prepared when we vote on something is what might be the trade-offs of a dedicated bond program. So, and what I mean by that is we also get requests for a more comprehensive bond program and things that ought to go into that. So what would be the inherent trade-offs if you determine what a dedicated GEO program looked like? I guess another way of saying is what gets given up, right? What is the approach? You know, one of the things that pops in my head is that when the housing plan was passed or a few years ago, one of the things that it talked about in terms of below 80% MFI, I think that was the number that was used. It may have been 60%, but I think it was 80%, is how big would we need to, how big we needed to go, and the bond number was much larger than what we've done, right? We've had 2+, if you count the Project Connect money, we're still not at that number, assuming that's where we want to be, things like that. So as you bring this forward, I would ask that also be part of what we look at. And I've written down adequate capacity here. That is part and parcel of what I'm saying, I think, is when I talk about the inherent trade-offs, what are we looking at in terms of adequate capacity for other items that might be in a comprehensive bond program in the near term. The other thing that I'd like to bring up is whether you guys can organize this list of projects as you bring it forward. And again, I'm not asking for it today because I understand exactly where we are today and appreciate where we are and what you've done. But bring us forward a table that shows a preferred or recommended method of finance. And I saw your last slide or your next to last slide, but I would like to be able to eyeball, and I think as we take this as we talk to the public about this, they're going to want to eyeball what would fall into the category of utility CIP or general fund CIP or enterprise or general fund operating budget, you know, all of the different buckets of money that get utilized, and what the recommendations would be about where you're going to, where that money would come from, because I think what that will do is it'll help us all understand the magnitude of whatever a GO bond program would look like if we wanted to try to do anything or everything that might be in this. It would also, I think, show us from an organizational standpoint, i.e. the city of Austin, what an organization-wide program, and this is an organization-wide program, as you've laid out, what an organization-wide program, how you can finance that with a variety of different funding mechanisms. I noticed when I read what had been presented, and then I noticed also in your report, you talk about road projects. Well, depending upon how you analyze this, those road projects, there's a way to do those independently, right? And so I want to make sure that we have those over in that. And that actually leads me to a question about what is, as you as a sustainability officer bring this forward, other than just saying climate and resiliency, or climate equity and resiliency, which are big words, and by that I mean carry a lot of weight. But what is a way, I'd like to have you all recommend to us a way for us to think through what our guiding principles are as we look at each one of these projects, and included in that would be the fiscal aspects. So what are the guiding principles, as we move forward on these, and that would help us, I think, almost with a decision tree approach, where you ask, what's the highest priority? And I wrote down when you were talking about land, which is a big item, and of course I take a lot of pride in things I started back a few years ago on land purchases for water quality. But you mentioned decreased emissions, and you also mentioned increased water resources. Well, there's other things to that, and there's other things. That's what I see as part of the decision tree. As we start looking at this and trying to parcel out where we might want to spend money, what are the guiding principles, what are the values, what are the results we get from different actions. And then that takes me to the next part of that, but things like on land use, I remember when we were doing water quality over the aquifer. One of the big things that we were trying to do there is actually do scientifically based analysis of where we were going to purchase the land to get the bang for the buck that we wanted. I think it's going to be important for us as we talk about these numbers and the size of these numbers that we do that as well. We make that a part of the decision tree going forward. Just what factors go into, the number on land, I don't mean to pick on land. I, in fact, think that ought to be a high priority. But because it's so big, I think is why it jumps out at me. How did that number come up? What were the factors that you were looking at that got you to that size number, and what were the values that you put into that? I think it's going to be important for us to think about that and analyze it. And I want to make sure that when we get it back, that what we're looking at is that it's an organizational-wide scan of highest priority climate actions, or an exhaustive list. I want us to be able to know what's the difference as we start making decisions. You mentioned in the memo, or it was mentioned in the memo, that additional work is needed, particularly around a cost-benefit analysis of these investments in comparison with other cities. Has that work started?
It has not started yet.
Okay. What's the timeline?
I think the timeline would be, I think we would need to work with council as to what the timeline is.
Okay.
And how specific do we get with that cost-benefit analysis?
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm asking the question. Yep. And that's why I'm saying what I'm saying about the other stuff too, is yep. The specificity, I think, becomes somewhat important when we're making especially when we're looking at how we're going to, what buckets of money we might use, and go back to that initial question I had, which is, what are we balancing here? What do we give up with that sort of thing? Have you done any sort of analysis, and I can't imagine that you're able to, but I want to ask the question of tax rate and fee increases as you looked at this?
No, that analysis has not been complete.
Okay.
That would be a next step.
Okay. The final thing, and then I'll be quiet about this, but I'm trying to throw out ideas about how it comes back to us so that we can proceed with rigor, and that is the climate fee. I must admit, when I saw that, my first reaction was, what does that mean, and how do you go about creating a new fee and making sure that it's appropriately tied to what it is you're collecting the fee for? What's the thought process on that?
Well, we would obviously need to do a lot of work with law and finance to figure out how would that actually be proposed. In other cities across the country, they actually created taxes related to businesses. I don't think that we're proposing that we create a tax, just because of our situation where we are. In Minneapolis, the fee that they created was like an on-bill fee connected to like utility franchise fees. So the idea is that it's something small, but over time generates. Over time it adds up.
And have you done has law done any sort of comparison of those other cities and the laws that we operate under in Texas?
Not yet.
Okay.
No.
Well, I thought that might be the answer.
Yep.
I just wanted to get out there.
Yeah, good questions.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
I appreciate.
By the way, I appreciate all the hard work.
Yeah, good questions.
As do I, and I appreciate the mayor's careful questioning on this. So the one question that I would add to the information that I think is still yet to be assembled, Mayor, is how we have a bond program underway. Mm-hmm. We have capital investments underway, and we have a balance of bond funds available to us that have not yet been sold, I guess, and that work has not yet been begun. Have you looked at how that work, both what is currently underway, what is pending, and the timeline for that, and this concept with these programs? Have you woven all of these strands together to give us a fully comprehensive look at what this spending and the eventual outcomes would look like?
So we have not yet. No, we were just focused on the projects and what would the potential projects be.
So that would be really useful too,
Yep.
Mayor, in addition to the questions that you've asked, to get a sense of where we're at, where we are in the closer term, and then the medium and the farthest reaches of the terms. That additional information would be really helpful.
Okay,
Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem. Other questions, Councilmember Ryan?
Morning, Zach. I really appreciate the thoroughness of this work. Y'all have been at this for a while, and it really shows, especially in what you put together in the memo and here today. I kind of want to look back where you started with the client equity plan. That plan, and I was not here for that, but my understanding was there was a lot of work that went into creating that plan. It was not only work throughout the community, but a lot of data, informed decisions. Can you talk just a little bit about, for instance, the 20,000 acre number? That wasn't just picked out of the air, right? There was science behind that.
Yeah, for the 20,000 acre number, that's actually one of the goals in the natural systems section in the climate equity plan. And yes, during that planning process, we analyzed different acres of protected land and increasing, if you protected the land and increased the carbon capture capacity of that land, we have run the analysis before on how much carbon would it capture. And it doesn't zero out or negate our total emissions, but the more that we protect and the bigger that we can increase that sort of natural systems carbon capture wedge, the better for the long term. So,
And when we look at the presentation, I don't know if they can pull up slide 9, but it's that progress towards the net zero by 2040. And the troubling element of this slide is we are falling behind further and further, right? In 2021, we were a little bit behind. 2022, even further. And I don't know when we're going to get the 2023 data, but I'm going to assume that nothing miraculous happened in 2023, and we're going to be, once again, even further away from where we need to be to reach our aggressive target. And you talked about how we as a city are at the forefront and really are setting some very ambitious goals, but those goals don't matter if we don't reach them. If we just say that's what we want to do,
Yep.
then there's no benefit there. And so I think it's really critical. You know, we go back to a few slides earlier. You talked about 75% of our goals and strategies within the climate equity plan are underway, and that is really important and really valuable knowledge. But I think that next slide that you have is the even more illuminating one, right? Where you said that while we're 75% are underway, only 25% are we actually on track to do what we set out to do.
Yep.
And so when the subforum that we have put together related to the environmental investment plan took a look at this, one of the questions we were asking ourselves is, you know, where are we off track? Where do we need to help us catch up? And I think, you know, the mayor mentioned it, the work that he did, and so I'm so thankful today, 25 years ago, that we went out and bought a bunch of land to protect our water and other areas. That was, we have never bought land and said, you know what, I really wish we hadn't done that. We were always so thankful because
I've done that personally. It's such an asset that we're always glad we have, and we find ourselves in a really odd situation in the city of Austin where lately prices have been going down. That is something that almost never happens, and so we at Audit and Finance had a discussion with PARD about their land acquisition budget, or as it related to the bond program that Mayor Pro Tem was talking about, and they're out, right? Because they were supposed to be. Their bond program was in 2018 and it's supposed to be a 6-year program. We're here in 2024. And so they have spent the money they were supposed to spend to buy land. And as you mentioned, buying it for one, whether it's PARD, whether it's watershed, it has so many purposes across departments and across just the community. And so that is one that, you know, we as a group really highlighted and wanted to put to the top because it is critical. And it is one of those also, to the mayor's point about when we look at something being ready to go and scoped out, land is much easier to do that.
Yep.
We, you know, when a piece of land becomes available and departments can assess whether or not that fits within their need, there's no big 4-year spend plan behind it, right? You buy the land and then you can start putting that into the portfolio, whether it's just a land bank or turn it into something useful. I wanted to really dive into one of the goals, and that is, it's goal number 4. It's achieve water demand of 152,000 acre-feet per year. And I don't know if you want to talk about this or Austin Water, but I'm curious how when we picked that number, and that was some years ago, I understand right now we're in the 170-something thousand range, so clearly a bit off. Why that number was picked, and where we are today versus that number, the importance of that discrepancy, or the effects, I should say, of that discrepancy.
Just before the director comes up, at the time when we established that goal, I'm almost positive that we looked at the Water Forward plan and what were the long-term goals there and tried to just align the goal with it. But
good morning, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. I'm Shay Rolson. I'm the director of Austin Water. The goal of 150,000 acre-feet, I will go back and find out the exact origin of that number for you, but in general, I would say that it is about optimizing our water use, reducing our water loss and really increasing our reclaimed water use. It's about all of the pieces of the Water Forward Plan and our future stewardship of our water resources, and how those different pieces of that jigsaw puzzle come together.
And when the mayor was talking about a cost-benefit analysis before, and y'all are undergoing your Water Forward update right now, and so I'm curious, as you look at the various options before you, I know because I've looked at those charts in the back of Water Forward. It's incredibly detailed, and clearly a lot of work went into every single one of those recommendations. So I'm curious where y'all see the biggest bang for the buck, or where we see the best water savings based on things we can control, right? If we could just tell everybody to stop doing 20-minute showers, that might be great. But things that we have control over, where you see the greatest bang for our buck.
Let me just say that as his lawyer, I don't want him admitting to me.
So the water, as you mentioned, the Water Forward Plan has a lot of detailed math and science that go into it, where we look at the whole range of water strategies on both the demand side and the supply side, and we assign yields to those. So if we can reduce demand, that's a yield. That's water we don't need. If we produce additional supply, that's additional water that we have available to us. And so, when we look at, we've done a lot of work to develop what we call a disaggregated demand model. So that basically looks at all of the demands in our community and slices it up by what people are using the water for. And so you can look at that pie chart and see that outdoor water use is probably our biggest option for reducing our water demand. And so that's a lot of our strategies are really leaning into landscape transformation, increasing reclaimed water, on-site water reuse, those strategies to reduce our water demand.
Very good. I think that covers my questions for you. I'll let you off the hook and bring Zach back. But
okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just scrolling down here. I had a note to myself. When we got together our subquorum for this, you had a very thorough chart that showed, the many various areas where we need to make those investments, as well as some of the funding options that go into those. We wanted to try to help you and the departments help you help us hone in a little bit on some of them. And so as we put out on Friday on the message board and shared with the city manager a list within that list of here are some priorities that we would like to help us do some of that analysis that the mayor was talking about earlier, of really get into more of the details of these, understanding that we can't do everything right now, but we can get more focused and figure out what these types of investments might look like, what they might cost like, what their impacts would be to whether it is a bond and the tax rate, or it is a bond supported by a fee, utility rates, and really help us arrive at a more informed decision as we get towards the budget. And so I imagine you've seen the list, but I just want to highlight that we believe there are projects, and I've spoken with some of these departments within that would be covered by some of the things on the list here, that these fall into plans and programs that are not just things they've thought of, just ideas that they mused about, but that these are part of plans that are actually in the works. And so we're not starting from scratch, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so looking forward, what we would like to do is figure out what is ready now. We talked about land. I think land is something that it's out there. It is. I would like to say abundant, but it's not as abundant as we would like. And so I think we need to really act now and act quickly especially when the market is in our favor to acquire land for this city, both for a host of reasons. And so helping us figure out what would be the right size bite at that apple. If 20,000 acres is our ultimate goal, what do we need to do over the next couple years to really achieve or set us on a path to achieve that goal? I know there are a lot of flooding issues as it relates to District 2, District 4. We've seen, I still remember that video of the person who came and, 3 feet of water in their home. These are issues that we need to address as a community, and so where do we need to make investments to make sure that we're on track there? And I know watershed protection has some ideas and plans in the works that hopefully can be fully scoped out. And so we have come together and really put this out there and invite everybody else, if their priorities, to do the same. But look forward to working with you on helping us go through this list and figure out what's ready, what's not. And then for things that are not, both within our list and the priorities you laid out, we have talked about this 2026 program and some of these, how can we introduce that to that conversation? And then lastly, on the fee question, we are in a different circumstance than Denver or Portland. We don't have certain tools available to us, and so we are going to have to be creative as a body of what will it require for us to free up general fund, right? Ultimately, so many of these things are not capital projects that can be bonded, and we're going to need to find revenue, and we have very little of it right now. So what's the magnitude on an annual basis that would be beneficial to really set us on that path where you mentioned, a little bit adds up over time. And so I want to figure out how we, not only what is legally feasible, but what will meaningfully make a mark. And I will end on this last item that, we talk about the bond projects already in place. We have a lot of transportation mobility related bonds, and so many of those projects, by their very nature, are concrete intensive. And so that was something that we felt as a group was really important to investigate and I really love that the JSC put this out, and I can't remember, I think y'all mentioned something as well, but how can we make that less environmentally impactful? Mm-hmm. And so if we were to create some kind of, whether it's low carbon concrete fund or other way to bridge the gap in there, if we went to one of these projects and said, hey, we want you to use low carbon concrete for this sidewalk, they say, well, great, but it costs an extra $5 million. Yeah. Well, great. If we had that resource available to help bridge that, we know this spending in these buildings is going to happen over the next 5 years or so. We have the opportunity to take projects we control and make them more climate friendly and more resilient. So that was something that we all felt very strongly about. And so I really want to work with you and Capital Delivery Services to figure out how we might get at that particular problem. So I've talked enough. I really appreciate y'all's work and time, and I look forward to the future work together.
Thank you.
Councilor Valen?
Just a quick question on regional water detention facilities and developing those. I know Councilmember Ryan Alter mentioned the flooding up on Mearns Meadow, and that there's already a project in place to fix that. It's getting constructed right now, but one of the features was just digging out basically a deeper kind of water detention area, and that would help a lot with controlling the flooding. And again, in terms of all of the zoning that we were talking about, I guess we have these kind of water detention ponds. I'm not even sure if that's the right word for them, but they're just kind of little spots that a property owner has to build to do some kind of water detention. But again, in my discussions with just property owners and engineers, and that's often seen as a less effective way to control flooding, and that the better way would be larger, more kind of regional water detention. Essentially, we would be building lakes. That's my understanding, to kind of capture flood waters and hold them and protect places. I was just wondering, in terms of our planning, where are we on those types of processes?
Good morning, Mayor, Council Member. Jorge Morales, Director of the Watershed Protection. So what you speak of, Council Member, is the Regional Stormwater Management Program. It's a program we've had over 30 years, and it is based on watersheds, and it is based on development, and we do regional ponds that instead of building those ponds, they will pay a fee in lieu of, and they contribute to that. And so that program is already in place, and we do it. The smaller scaled ponds and localized flooding is a different situation. And as we work through the recent changes to the code, we are working to figure out how we do that and simplify that. But ultimately, the conveyance systems, the storm systems, is another program that we have, and we've mapped, modeled the system so we understand where there's capacity, where there isn't. And so evaluating, but that's more localized, and it's a different program. And we don't have anything like small-scale regional detention pond like you're referring to. It's for the larger scale flood mitigation.
And in terms of the larger detention ponds, building new, for example, where are we on that? Is the fee in lieu? Is there enough money there to move forward with a project? If not, is there kind of any anticipated kind of timeline for that to be available? Any sense of that?
Yes, we actually have a program. So what I can do is follow back up, because that's a lot of details. So I can provide you the projects we've done, the ones that are in the works, and how we use those funds, because they're not always necessarily large ponds. There's different ways that we do improvements with the same RSMP fee. But
Okay.
I can come back to the council with more details on that.
I appreciate that. It's an important discussion. It's one that I'm trying to understand, especially, honestly, in the context of the ETOD and the development that we're going to be putting in. We really have to keep up with the planning on that to make sure that we're balancing all the different factors. But I look forward to sitting down with you to go over some of these issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Members, I think that wraps us up. One thing that Councilmember Ryan Alter, and then I think I would also put what Councilmember Vela was just saying in the category, and I meant to say it earlier when I was asking questions, but when you put together the what I keep referring to as a decision tree, where does it do this for us, does that do this for us, that kind of thing. One of the things that I think comes to mind, land is one of the key aspects of that, of what does it do beyond what is kind of the immediate thought, right? Flooding gets mentioned. And so I had written down a note that I didn't say anything about it, but as you analyze this, particularly by the departments, and you look at what you're talking about doing, that department doing, transfer station comes to mind. Is there a component of that would add to the quality of the day-to-day direct service that the city provides, in addition to the benefit of sustainability and addressing climate? But one of the key things is if you can do things with some of that money that get you land purchase and directly address things like flooding, so that your department is able to achieve other important goals of that department. Or we're going to spend that kind of money on a transfer station. It gets us certain climate, but what does it also get us? And I'm not saying it has to, I'm just suggesting that part of your analysis of the decision process ought to include, it enhances these specific services to our citizens as we spend that money as well. So I'll end it there, but say, this is obviously an extraordinarily high priority by a number of council members and me, and I appreciate the rigor that started here and the rigor that will continue, so that we'll be in a position to make the sort of decision I think that our public expects us to make on something that's of extraordinarily high priority to them as well. So thank you very much, and thanks to all the staff that's here today. We'll let you go back to work.
Thank you.
Thank you all.